We have a couple of presentations today. Very anxious to hear really related to the education issues and how we might be able to drive some efficiencies through our education expenditures. First up will be Dr. Gary Ritter of the Office of Education Policy Facility Director and Endowed Chair in Education Policy at the University of Arkansas. I think you're getting your presentation ready. Are you good to go?
Yes.
All right. The floor is yours, and we'll take questions after your presentation.
Yes, sir. I'm just trying to get the presentation pulled up. I apologize for the delay. It's the most recent one you'll see. Okay, I need to go to the left. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, thank you for being with us today. And
There it is. Okay. Thank you. As it's being pulled up, I'll introduce myself. My name is Gary Ritter. I'm a professor at the University of Arkansas, and I've studied ed policy there for the last 17 years. Before I entered ed policy, I was a teacher in Camden, New Jersey in elementary schools. And so my recent research, although culminating in a 2013 book, was on merit pay. That's the book on the cover. As I understand my charge here today, it is not necessarily to argue for or against merit pay, but to provide you a lay of the land on how teacher merit pay might work, what obstacles you might face if trying to do it, what are common criticisms, and if you wanted to do merit pay, how you might avoid those criticisms. And as I also understand it, I believe I should present for roughly 30 to 40 minutes and prepare for questions afterwards. My own bias, if you're open, is to have you interject whenever you wish to ask me questions.
yes, and you might condense the presentation.
I'm happy to. How far would you like me to condense it?
Can you go 20?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I'll be turning back and forth so I can talk through this. Quick overview. I'm going to talk about why schools might consider the idea of teacher merit pay. What are common criticisms? What does the evidence say? I'll touch on each of these briefly and allow for more questions. That way we can be respectful of your time. What are the characteristics of a potentially effective plan? How might it affect different sorts of teachers? And I could even talk about how a plan might be designed if we get that far. So why are schools even considering it? Schools are trying to think of, and is this okay? Are you hearing me through the microphone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
No, but the live streamers might not be, so.
All right, I'll hang out here. I'm sorry if I'm blocking your way. I'm trying to stay out of your way. So why might policymakers be looking toward merit pay as a strategy? Well, there's not a great consensus on effective educational interventions to improve kids' learning. There's all sorts of debate about all sorts of strategies. The one, however, piece of evidence that there is consensus in education research is that teacher quality matters. Teacher quality differs, and kids who have effective teachers really gain long-term benefits from having effective teachers. But the research provides little guidance as to how to identify effective teachers before they enter the classroom. How do we currently pay teachers? Well, the current teacher salary structure is based on tenure and degree. It's a lockstep teacher salary structure. The arguments for it, of course, are it's fair. People who look alike are treated alike. If I'm a 5-year teacher with a master's degree, I'm treated like every 5-year teacher with a master's degree. And it's straightforward and simple. Here's what it looks like, one way to imagine it. Imagine a new teacher starting off, let's say, making $30,000 in his or her first year of teaching as compared to maybe a new business grad, maybe running a Gap or something as his or her first job making $35,000. The teacher is making less for sure, but down the road, if the business student does a great job and is effective, he or she stands to make a great deal more salary, whereas the teacher would follow this lockstep track. So perhaps that isn't the ideal structure for rewarding effectiveness, rewarding hard work, rewarding solid teaching. How about if we think of effective teachers relative to ineffective teachers? So here's the track for an effective teacher, an excellent teacher, someone who stays late, works hard, whose kids do really well. How about his or her peer, let's say me, who doesn't work as hard and I take it easy? Well, that's my salary. Yeah. So the concern is, of course, that there are no rewards or acknowledgement of effectiveness. So some criticisms of this structure, and please again interrupt if you have questions. I'm moving too quickly to get through in 20 minutes. It certainly limits the flexibility of school leaders. It doesn't allow school leaders to, for example, deal with geographic shortages or discipline area shortages in the same way that a business might. If I'm struggling to find math teachers, if I were a business, I would have to pay more money to get math teachers. School leaders don't have that sort of flexibility. They don't have the flexibility to provide extra compensation for areas of excellence or areas of need. So what happens is we have, to some extent, a counterproductive reward structure where good teachers, because they cannot receive dollars and cents compensation, might seek compensation in other ways. For example, they might seek to work in easier schools. They might transfer schools to environments perhaps with less high poverty students, with students who are easier to teach, higher income students, higher academic performance students. So that's not the best outcome, where our best teachers seek to leave our students who need them the most. They might, however, choose to leave differently. They might say, well, I'm going to go into administration because that's where I can get recognized or gain extra compensation. Again, this is a counterproductive outcome where good teachers are moving further away from the kids who need the most. Finally, they might choose to leave the field entirely, which is the worst possible outcome, right? Good teachers moving entirely out of the field of education. Performance pay aims to address this, or flexible pay in general, aims to address this by paying teachers for higher levels of effectiveness. And this would provide school officials with the flexibility to recruit, retain, and reward highly effective teachers. This is, of course, based on the assumption that it is difficult to identify highly effective teachers a priori before they enter the classroom. We can't just identify them by saying, oh, you have this degree or you've graduated from this school. We're not able to see who's going to be excellent or who's going to be average or who's going to struggle that way. However, we can tell after they've been in the classroom who's been effective and who hasn't. So teacher pay or differential pay allows school leaders to be attentive to that change, those differential performance of teachers. And again, the idea is to make sure we keep the most effective teachers in the classroom with the kids who need them the most. And of course, you can imagine the sticky issue, which we're going to talk about, is effectiveness. How do you define effectiveness? So, how might teacher pay affect teacher performance? You can imagine two ways. In the short term, it might affect teacher motivation. In other words, if I'm going to get a bonus for my kids really learning their math this year, I might work harder. This is a bit more challenging to believe because we might imagine we're all working roughly as hard as we can. But of course, on the margins, most of us in almost any field imagine we could be motivated to work a little harder or work this weekend rather than take the weekend off or something. But the motivation effect is a short-term effect and may not be as meaningful perhaps as the composition effect. The composition effect refers to the idea that in the long run, we might be discouraging people who might have been excellent teachers from entering the field because they believe the field might not recognize or reward their efforts. So these are two ways we might imagine that merit pay or performance pay might lead to better outcomes for kids. So in short, supporters believe that merit pay might encourage teachers to become more innovative, try new things, work a little harder, and it might lead to increased salary satisfaction if I believe that my effort is being rewarded with recognition and indeed salary. Folks who are opposed to merit pay or concerned about it believe it might lead to counterproductive competition. So not helpful competition, but indeed competition that might sabotage the collegial work environment, might therefore lead to a degraded work environment, and if organized or developed incorrectly, it might lead to a decreased focus on low-performing students. So if I'm being rewarded merely on test scores, I might run away from the low-performing students. Of course, I'm going to suggest that we wouldn't want to set up a scheme that rewards merely based on point-in-time test scores. Rather, you could set up a scheme that rewards good work with low-income or low-achieving students. So what does the research say? Very briefly, and I can talk about any of these points more if you wish. The summary of studies on teacher attitudes suggests that generally there's not the negative finding you might suspect when merit pay, and it's only been a few times that teacher attitudes have been studied, but when reasonably organized merit pay systems have been put in place, The impact on teacher attitudes is either nil. You don't get teachers saying, I worked harder because of the money. But you do sometimes find teachers saying we've worked together more if there's a collegial component in the merit pay plan. You don't find people saying, no, I hate the plan as much as some might have suspected. With regard to student achievement, the findings are mixed. There have been a handful of positive findings, a handful of negative findings. So I would suggest that the jury is still out in terms of the empirical evidence for or against merit pay. So let's think of what we might be worried about if we're criticizing merit pay, and I'll talk about how we might challenge these criticisms. I'll go through them briefly, but it's an unproven reform, it's too expensive, it forces competition, it's not connected to instruction, the bonuses are too small in lots of plans, teachers are already working hard, bonuses effectiveness is measured by some secret formula. If that's the case, how is that supposed to be motivating if I don't know how it works? This thing is too difficult to measure anyway. Teachers don't teach for the money. What about teachers who teach non-tested subjects? This might lead to unproductive teaching to the test, and it might discourage teaching disadvantaged students. I'll go through each of these quickly, and again, we could ask more. So it's an unproven reform. Well, any reform before we try it is unproven, and certainly the status quo is not effective. In other words, there is no evidence suggesting that master's degrees lead to better teachers. So what we're doing is also unproven. So it's calling merit pay an unproven reform is kind of setting an unfairly high bar. The status quo is an unproven reform. It's too expensive. Well, it's true that it would cost money to add salary increases connected to performance, but we have current salary increases that are disconnected to performance. It would be possible, if policymakers were so inclined, to reallocate and use some of the salary increase money into performance-based pools. It forces competition. It could force competition, and I would argue it could force unproductive competition if the scheme were set up as a so-called zero-sum scheme that said, for example, the top 10% of teachers in our school will get bonuses and no one else. Well, if that's the case, surely I might not want to work with my fellow teacher because if she gets a bonus, that's one more spot that I can't get. But if you set up a plan differently, and I'm going to suggest that if you were trying to set up a plan, you do, where teachers get bonuses based on the extent that they reach their individual goals. So my gaining a bonus does not decrease my colleagues' opportunity to gain a bonus. So you could do it in a way that doesn't force zero-sum, unhelpful competition. People are concerned that it's disconnected from instruction. One would certainly, I think, if building a useful plan, connect it to instruction. Have a piece where you include teacher observations on a thoughtful, perhaps Charlotte Danielson-like rubric, and make that be part of the teacher rating. Teacher rating should certainly not only be based on student test scores, but it likely shouldn't ignore student test scores either. It should be based on a whole set of things that we believe teachers should do. In the same way when baseball players get bonuses for their performance, it's not based on only hitting or only fielding, it's based on the whole of the baseball players' competition for the team. Bonuses are too small, that's one criticism. In lots of prior plans, folks have put lots of effort together to build a merit pay plan, after which teachers might earn $750 extra at the end of the year. If you're going to do that, I would suggest not wasting any of your time doing that. It certainly wouldn't be motivating. It wouldn't change anyone's desire to enter the field to maybe get $750 at the end of the year. So I would argue that if you're going to do this, some sort of significant level of bonuses should be sought. Teachers are already working hard. Well, this is certainly true. Most teachers are already working hard. I don't know any of us who are always working to our 100% max, and I don't know that a bonus would change that. But it might allow us to encourage folks to work differently, try more innovation, be willing to take a risk and try something different if we think we might be rewarded for taking that risk. Currently, there's almost no reward for taking a risk. The reward might be for keeping your head down and doing the same things you've always been doing. So to encourage people and reward them for trying different curricular strategies, for example. Okay, it's based on a secret formula. Well, you want to base it on a very clear formula that teachers, policymakers, and lay people can understand. I can promise you that if you're rewarding me based on some formula that I don't understand, I'm not going to be motivated by that reward possibility. Teacher quality is too difficult to measure. It is difficult to measure, and we're going to measure it imperfectly. The question isn't, I don't think, if you're thinking about whether to try teacher merit pay, is it a perfect plan or not? You're not going to get an imperfect plan. It's going to be imperfect. But the current system provides 0 rewards for teacher effectiveness or teacher performance. So you don't want to hold an unreasonably high bar of utopia. If it doesn't perfectly measure quality, then you can't do it. So you want to do your best, but there are going to be imperfections, no doubt. Teachers don't teach for the money is one common retort to folks who tried to push the idea of merit pay. Well, of course, teachers don't teach solely for money, just like professors don't profess solely for money. Money is one component of a compensation scheme. We all like lots of different parts of our job. I like the autonomy. When I was a teacher, I liked getting a month or 2 off in the summer. We like different things. But it's certainly at the margin, we would think that more money is more desirable than less money. Also, we know that teachers say, look, I'd rather have a supportive work environment than more pay. That would make my life better. And I certainly believe that's true. However, I don't know how policymakers can flip a switch and create a more supportive work environment. If you could do that, I think you should do that. That would be great. But since that's a harder policy to imagine implementing at a policymaker level, this is one of the reasons that this might be a policy people might try. Non-core subjects are left out. It's easier to imagine rewarding teachers for math scores or reading scores or testable subject scores. That's true. However, we could imagine developing a merit pay scheme that did reward non-core teachers, just not for test-based outcome measures, but for classroom observations, for professionalism, for supervisory evaluations, for lots of things. So we don't need to imagine a one-size-fits-all rating scheme. Finally, teaching to the test. That's true. If we're going to reward based on student test scores, teachers will likely pay attention to that. So you don't want to do this unless you have an underlying assessment that you are pleased with, that you think is measuring important skills that you'd like kids to learn. And finally, it discourages teaching at disadvantaged students. I would argue the reverse could be true. If you set up your scheme in the appropriate way, for example, maybe you gave extra weight in someone's rating scheme for boosting the scores of kids who started in the lowest quartile, or boosting the scores of disadvantaged students, then indeed you would encourage the teaching of disadvantaged students. So it all depends how you set up the scheme. You could certainly set up a scheme that discourages teaching disadvantaged students. You could just say, I'm going to give you a rating based on your year-end test scores. And of course, advantaged kids who start off at a higher spot, who have more advantages, are going to end up at a higher spot at year-end. But if you reward based on growth and count kids' movements from where they started to where they end, then you're no longer penalizing teachers of disadvantaged students. Okay. So, summarizing the characteristics of what I think would be a good merit pay plan if you were to do it, it should be straightforward. Teachers and policymakers and lay people need to understand the rules by which people are being evaluated. It needs to be clear. It must be based on student growth, not levels of attainment. Otherwise, it's not useful. You're just rewarding teachers for having high socioeconomic status kids. If you just give rewards based on the fraction of kids passing an exam, for example, you need to have growth from when the child starts in the classroom to when the child ends. Should be based on multiple measures of effectiveness. Part of the reason for this is that you're going to be measuring teachers who don't have test scores. But also we know that teachers do lots of different things that are not solely related to kids' growth on a math exam or on a reading exam or a science exam. Teachers increase kids' self-esteem, they make them confident, they make them better writers. They do lots of important things that should be incorporated as the entire recipe of a teacher effectiveness. These plans should intentionally foster collaboration in schools. So not only should we avoid unnecessary, unhelpful competition, and I would argue that there is helpful competition, but we should certainly avoid unproductive competition, like only the top 10 teachers get a reward so everyone else is out. That's clearly unhelpful. But if you built a scheme, and the kind of scheme that we suggest in our book for districts who want to try it, that has an individual-based component. So part of my rating is based on how well my students in my classroom do, but also a team-based component. So part of my rating is also based on how well all of the kids in my teacher team do. And my teacher team could be the English department, or the math department, or all those junior high teachers, or it could be all the teachers at the school. However you decide on defining your team, the idea is there should be a team-based component so that I care about my peers' success and I'm indeed rewarded for my peers' success. But also there does need to be an individually based component as well to avoid the free rider problem, right, where I can kind of sail on the coattails of my harder working colleagues and get rewarded for all of their hard work. And you could create a scheme that fosters collaboration. Again, I win if my peers do better.
Dr. Ritter, I just wanted to be in recognition of the time. So
Yep.
if we could kind of wrap up here just a little bit, because I want to leave some time for questions.
Okay, I will do this in 3 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. They should be connected to a comprehensive improvement strategy, so it should be more than just merit pay, and I'll talk about that more if anyone asks. And the rewards should not be tiny; they should be large. If you're gonna do it, there are the summaries. And really quickly, then I'll finish with this. You might imagine, look, this doesn't make sense to me. Every teacher is working as hard as he or she can. There are different types of teachers, I imagine, and there are those highly effective and motivated teachers who are doing as much as they can. This is an example of an actual one of those from Little Rock in Arkansas. I imagine merit pay is unlikely to affect this teacher's day-to-day performance. But it might affect him or her 4 or 5 years down the road because he might feel appreciated for his hard work rather than rewarded just the same as the guy next door, maybe this guy, who, and there are some of these, we all know these teachers exist in schools, they're real life teachers, and you might not feel motivated if you're only being recognized and rewarded just the same as the guy next door, who is this guy. Now, the motivation effect might influence this sort of teacher. It will influence this sort of teacher in one of 2 ways. He will kick it up and work harder because there'll be a reward in it for him to work harder. Or after a few years of getting this negative signal, low rating, low rating, low rating, he or she might seek out a different field that he or she finds more pleasing. Finally, what about a new highly motivated teacher? This teacher doesn't know what to do. She enters the classroom. She's got some teachers who are working very hard for their money, highly effective, engaging with kids. She sees this other guy next door, and she can say, I can either work hard or not. It's possible that it would be helpful if there were more reasons for her to emulate this guy rather than this guy. And merit pay would provide that. And finally, what about folks who are in other fields? Folks who are in other fields are often used to some sort of merit pay. However imperfect that merit pay is, right? Sales folks get motivated by incentives and year-end bonuses and are often influenced by things that are a bit beyond their control. The economy might be bad in this region. A big business might have opened up to compete with me. But to some extent, the more effort they put in, they are rewarded for it. And so folks who are coming in from other fields into teaching might be drawn by the fact that their hard work can be rewarded. And I'll stop there and I can show you what one might look like if you wanted to, but I think I'm in 20 minutes. I started at 1:10, so thank you.
Well, you get a bonus.
If you would have told me that, I would have spoken faster.
So open it up for questions. Senator Palumbo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. I think with where our student achievement is, we should be open to doing anything possibly to increase that. But you sort of caught my attention by when you said that there are studies where other states where this has happened. And how many states are there where they do merit pay?
So no states have done it statewide. The studies are always at a district level or at a school level.
There's literally no state in the country that has statewide merit pay.
Absolutely not. Florida almost became that state until it was vetoed in about 2011.
Okay. I mean, how many different, local school districts have it? I mean, are there very many that do it?
No, I mean, there are small bonuses here and there, but a merit pay scheme that is substantial, there are fewer than 50 around the country and fewer than 15 that have been studied well.
Okay, and then the results of those have indicated some have shown an increase in student achievement and some have not.
Some have shown, yes, it's mixed. There's a big New York study that ended up being negative. It was only team-based, no individual rewards.
When you say negative, did it show a decrease in student
New York
performance?
actually showed a decrease in student performance at those at the schools that received the bonuses, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. One in Nashville, Tennessee, with middle school math teachers, was teachers were randomly assigned to get large bonuses up to $15,000 based on their kids' achievement, and it only worked well.
Randomly selected? You said randomly?
They were randomly selected to either have the opportunity to earn the bonus or not. And the reason they were randomly selected because you wanted to see if the opportunity to earn a bonus led to teachers teaching better than those who didn't have the opportunity to earn the bonus. And so the group that had the medicine, the opportunity to earn the bonus, did better with their students in 5th grade, but not in 6th and 7th and 8th. So we view this as essentially a null finding. It didn't work. It helped a tiny bit in 1 grade. It didn't hurt, but it was not. Backers of merit pay imagine it would do more. Opponents of merit pay said, shut the door, merit pay doesn't work.
Okay. Well, I mean, it just seems, I don't know, I mean, I think that in West Virginia, our student achievement is not where we would like it to be. But from what you're saying, this doesn't necessarily seem like this is the answer to solve that problem because of the groups that have tried it, not necessarily been that helpful.
Well, there have been others in Texas and one in Chicago where it has been positive for students. So, but let me be very clear. The way we've tested it so far has only tested the motivation effect, because these studies have lasted 1 or 2 years. And so we've asked if within 1 or 2 years did it change instruction and did kids learn more? And not surprisingly, we find a mix, and often no. I don't imagine you'd expect to see the change so quickly. We haven't even tested the composition effect. Might it make different people enter the field? And with concerns these days that not enough people are entering teaching, it might be worth trying something different. And one other way, if you wanted to cast it in favor of merit pay, is none of the studies so far show that the traditional pay structure is superior to merit pay. So why engage in this traditional structure that is totally disconnected from performance when you could engage in one that at least makes more intuitive sense? That's a different way to frame those exact same findings.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Senator Blair?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems like you're familiar with some of the problems now. I want to bring something up to you and see whether you've seen it incorporated anywhere else. On the merit pay, I can understand it on the teachers, but education is a triad. And it's the student itself, the parent, and the teacher. Those 3 things. That's what makes it work. You know, parents get very involved if there's student scholarships for sports and this and that. Students become involved if there's merit pay, so to speak. You know, I'm one of the guys that was in 3rd grade, 4th grade, giving me an A or a C didn't make any difference to me because I didn't understand the difference. But if there was a value that was attached to that followed along with me, merit pay, so to speak, has any other state looked at not just the teacher aspect of it, but looked at getting the parents involved, getting the student motivated through merit?
So I have 2 quick answers to that.
Sure.
One reason we think more of teacher merit pay is we don't worry about compelling the kids, because kids do reap the consequences of poor performance in school. The problem is they reap them down the line, and it's hard for any kid to see that far ahead. But teachers, on the other hand, are paid civil servants, so that would be the reason we focus on that. However, there have been a few studies that have, for example, tested the theory of paying kids for better scores on AP exams, or paying them for better grades in math or in science. And there are fewer studies, believe it or not, than there are of teacher merit pay, but those studies do seem to come up positive when the rewards are short-term. So when we don't expect kids to see far into the future, when the rewards are short-term and we can see a way for them to address it. So if we can imagine, if I just studied harder, or if I get paid for attendance, I know how to fix attendance. So if kids can figure out a way to meet the goal, they're more likely to be incentivized to do it. On the other hand, if you told me that you would give me a reward to learn nuclear physics by 4 weeks from now, the reward wouldn't be motivating because I can't imagine my way to get there. So the short-term the goals and the more concrete the goals, the more likely they are to work. But other states, or pardon me, other districts have tried it, and that is an interesting strategy and has been positive.
You know, because I can see incorporating them all together.
Sure. Yep.
Would bring you an outcome that you'd be hoping for, but individually, none of them work well by themselves.
It's an important piece because one concern teachers have of any merit pay attached to kids' test scores. What if the kids don't care about the exam? Then how are they going to reveal how much I've taught them if they're not putting any effort on the exam? So you need a situation in which kids are actually truthfully revealing what they've learned.
Yeah, and it could be the other side of it too, where the teacher dumbed down the test to gain reward.
Well, you would certainly want a test that was across the board similar and wouldn't allow individual folks to dumb down the test, as you
And see,
say.
and I would be opposed to that because I like the teachers being able to take care of their own curriculum in the classroom, because each one has different styles of being able to do that, and then you take that away from them.
I would suggest you're not taking that away from them. They should do everything they want in their own classroom, and just at the end of the year, the kids take a short exam to summarize how much they've learned. And this wouldn't at all affect what teachers would do in the classroom. This is just one exam that measures, let's say, the kids' growth in math.
And see, and I wouldn't trust that at all because that's a sample rate of 1 then. You need a much higher sample rate if you're going to be able to accurately determine whether the teacher is deserving of merit pay.
But it wouldn't be a sample of 1, right? It'd be a sample of maybe 150 if I teach 150 kids, or 30, or 60. For each kid, it's a sample of 1. And sure, some child did abnormally poorly that day, but that's bound to wash off as you have a larger sample with more kids for each teacher. But you're right, it is certainly imperfect. And there are all sorts of, it is not a perfect measure of how much a child has learned.
Another question? Thank you.
Chairman Colfar, let's consider
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's just, I love the sound of this. First of all, could you make that case study copy maybe available to us?
Sure, yes.
Yes, we're gonna make it available to the
That'd
entire
be great.
The whole, its whole presentation.
Yes.
Since it was cut.
Yes.
It's in the book, the case study's in the book too, and if any of you bought the book, that would be
Well,
at least
that-
one
that
book
was-
sale.
it's
So that was- and I'm hoping to get one, or if 2 of you bought it, it would triple the number of book sales I've had, so I really love that.
But we will make the presentation available to
You mostly through your presentation, you mentioned the word bonus. And when I think of merit pay, I think more of different annual salary, so to speak, than bonus. So you're not just mean bonuses as a.
That's a great point, and I should have been more clear. I think I rushed through that a little quickly. So as a professor, I actually am given merit pay. That's how we get raises or not. And exactly as you suggested, it changes our salary.
Okay.
However, in this field of K-12 teaching, there's been a strong resistance to merit pay, and I think you want to venture into it lightly, and you wouldn't want to mess with anyone's salary. You want to leave the salary set and make them bonuses, and then if the field got comfortable with it, then you might move into influencing salary when people were comfortable with it, if that ever became the case. So I am suggesting bonuses, but the reason is as a way to gently enter into this and not try and fully change salary structure all at once. This same salary structure has existed in teaching for decades, so if you're going to change it, I think you want to do it gently. That's my thinking.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, when I've brought this up before among teaching friends, another negative they bring up is cronyism, that the principal likes so-and-so better than he likes another. How do you get around that kind of thing?
So I think you're right, that's a great concern, and however, if you're opposed to merit pay, I'll say, okay, we'll base it all on test scores. Well, wait, tests aren't fair. Okay, we'll base it all on subjective judgments. Well, that's not fair, cronyism. So you could push all of those ideas away. I think because each one is imperfect, you need a mix, and you are worried about cronyism, and I think the ideal way to deal with cronyism would be, if I'm a school leader, hopefully I'm held darn accountable for how well my school does, to the point where even though I might not like you as much, if you're a great teacher, I'm gonna do what I need to do to keep you here, and I'll be so motivated by my incentive structure that I will be more concerned with what I should be concerned with, kid learning at the school, than keeping my neighbor happy, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Cole.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have several questions, but in my 2 minutes, it might just help me if you would run through the example of the case study there. Could you do that in 3 minutes? or so?
I'll try and do it super fast, yes, sir. And you could yell to me when 2 minutes are done. So my case study is, we just imagine a school. So I would imagine if I were a teacher, I'd want to know how I'm being graded on it. So our strategy is you rate it on 100 points. That's a reasonable number that teachers, people in schools are used to. Kids get grades out of 100. You would actually have a report card so that a teacher would believe it wasn't a secret formula. I could clearly see how I was being rated. And we would argue you get rated for teacher-specific effectiveness, that upper left-hand corner, let's say 50 points. And who cares about the proportion? This was our guess, but you could do whatever you wish. But teacher-specific effectiveness, school-wide growth underneath that for 35 points, let's say that's the team-based portion. So again, I'm rewarded for my own individual work and my contribution to the team's work. And finally, supervisor evaluation, and that is a piece where cronyism could get involved. But the more specified and rubric-based you make it, at least the more the person would have to justify that. Where a teacher could walk into his or her end-of-year meeting, and as long as they knew the test scores, they could know their bonus walking in. And our own example in a state like Arkansas that has salaries somewhat similar to West Virginia is you should have maximum payouts for core teachers of roughly $10,000. That's a lot, but no, most teachers aren't going to get the maximum. But if I earn, let's say, 75 of my 100 merit points, I would get 75% of 10,000 or $7,500. It's clear, it makes sense, it's concrete. And then with each piece, so for a core teacher, for example, the individual classroom piece, you could base it on a couple different components. You could say overall test score growth, and I wrote NWEA because that is an exam that is really well situated to measure growth. So you can look at where a child starts, where a child ends, and did this child gain the amount of growth he or she should gain. And you might also include a component, did 90% of your kids make expected growth? Because I might be worried that you might try and increase average growth by only focusing on 20 of your 30 kids who look like they might learn the best and ignoring some other kids. So this incentivizes you to make sure everyone grows. So the point there is you could make up whatever pieces you want. The idea is to make up pieces that incentivize what you want to incentivize, and you want to avoid perverse incentives. And again, the easiest perverse incentive would be if you said, I'm going to give you a reward based on what fraction of your kids are proficient. Well, if you're based on what fraction of your kids are proficient, I'm going to ignore the kids who are already way above proficient. Why do I care about them? I'm also going to try and teach classes with already high-achieving kids. I'm going to ignore disadvantaged kids. So you want to create a structure that ignores or avoids clearly perverse incentives. And you want to have one that you can change. And if I were running a school, each year I would go to my faculty and say, what do we want to incentivize this year? What are our key goals? Let's create that in that way.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ritter. If there are no final questions, we'll proceed on to the next presentation, and we'll get the